Good afternoon, everyone. Oh my goodness. Good afternoon, everyone. Much, much better, much better. Welcome to the beautiful Wiles Chapel. My name is Dr. Peggy Winder, and I'm a professor in the Department of Sport Professions and director of our Diversity Education Program. Today, Newberry College concludes its annual Dufford Diversity and Inclusion Week events with a panel discussion entitled Challenge for Change. We are so excited and so honored to have in our presence today international, this is going to be fantastic. I just can't even talk about it. But we're going to be talking about these international thought leaders, and the topics of discussion today will be social and justice awareness, international reconciliation, and economic inclusion. Panelists include Mr. Gavin Sirkin. Mr. Sirkin, emerging market editor, Bloomberg News author of Frontier, Exploring the Top 10 Emerging Markets of Tomorrow. He has been writing about developing economies for the best part of 2 decades as the editor of Portfolio International Magazine, and more recently as the head of the Emerging Markets International Desk at Bloomberg News in London. Let's hear it for Mr. Gavin Sirkin. Mr. Vincent Cole, international civil rights activist, actor, world peace advocate. Mr. Cole has a great passion for human rights and justice for all, which he believes leads to true peace and reconciliation. This was driven into him at a very young age, understanding the teachings of Martin Luther King and Gandhi. He also has a deep passion for learning and has been the driving force behind the key International Peace Reconciliation Day, which has become a worldwide phenomenon and is celebrated in April. Please give it up for Mr. Vincent Coyle. And last, but certainly not least, Mr. Terrence Gallman, civil rights activist, playwright, film producer, and author of the memoir, Finding Me. After serving a 12-year sentence, Mr. Gallman has been working towards his mission, which is to assist people with making positive changes in their lives. An influential figure to people who face the stigma of incarceration, Terrence provides mentoring and ongoing support to incarcerated men, women, and their families. He helps them reposition themselves back into society, creating a positive self-image and showing them how to live successful lives outside of the prison system. Please help me again in giving them a Newberry College welcome. At this time, I will turn into the hands of Mr. Terrence Gallman.
Thank you, Dr. Winder. We definitely want to thank everyone for coming out to participate with us on the groundbreaking community college connection. I want to thank Dr. Pillar. I haven't saw her, but definitely Dr. Winder Scott joining your staff, Marshall, Maddie, Justice Smith, the community, Linda Libby, my good friend and pal here, Bobcat Entertainment, who was one of the pioneers for us starting we want to start a proactive approach for justice awareness in our community in response to what we've seen with Ferguson, Baltimore, and things around the nature where a lot of unarmed, specifically black men were being killed by police. And I thought it would be, because of my background, my experience in the justice system, I thought it would be helpful that I came out and spoke about some of the things that the media have not shown. And first of all is that at that time it was about a suspect. And the law justified the use of deadly force against a suspect. So as a young black man with a black son out here, I had to try to find some way to educate the community as well as law enforcement and justice system about, what our fears and what our concerns are and who we are as a person and the fears we're faced with. And kind of be a liaison between the Justice Department and the community. And I wanted to come out and do it from an educated perspective. versus ignorance or versus someone that's out there in the street that's just trying to, muscle it. I just thank God that Newberry College opened its doors to be a catalyst in that approach. And little did I know when I started to do it proactively, we just went to the State House to produce a video for the film There's No Right Way to Do Wrong. But shortly before that, Mr. Vincent Core here, who's one of the hardest working men I ever met, noticed the work I was doing online because I was actually trying to get the community involved to show their support proactively. It's one thing to get the community going out there against tanks and, protests and things of that nature. But, I didn't want to take my son out there to do that. So I said, look, let me see if I can get things going without that much, drama and turmoil. And Vincent Core said he liked the work that I was doing and that I asked him would he participate. And, of course, he said, sure, I have a lot of respect for your community. Your community done a lot for me, and the United States is often seen as a beacon of light around the world, and, they need to always keep it right because they have inspired me and my community. And at that time, I was not familiar with the struggle of Northern Ireland and the connection they had with the U.S. civil rights and Dr. King and the civil rights movement. And in the U.S., it's more been black and white. And theirs, of course, were not black and white. They was the same race, with their same issues, but Protestant Catholic, and he'll be more in tune about that shortly. But saying that, he agreed to join us, at the State House and to talk about reconciliation. And, when I went and looked at his profile and I saw the work he had done internationally around the world, it just gave me a whole nother level of respect for my community, but the opportunity that we have. And with that being said, he arrived with us at the State House in Linda Lever of Faith Fairview Baptist Church and the community with Bobcat Entertainment. We all came out to the State House with the mayor there in the community to just celebrate reconciliation. We played music and shook hands, hugged. And after that being said, we knew that we had to get out in the community to take it to the next level. And that's knocking on doors with businesses, leaders, and things of that nature, trying to get them involved. And lo and behold, just after that, Vincent Core went back on the European book tour with my book, Finding Me, where he actually traveled, all the European countries, just telling people about the work that we're doing in the States and that he was involved and that he was giving me that full support. And again, me could not believe it because, we have not seen that level of support in community activism among the races. And even to a few days ago, people see us together, they're like, what's this international statesman doing with this black guy? And, people looking like this everywhere we go. But again, lo and behold, when you go back 50 years to the U.S. civil rights movement and the work that they have done, they had the same struggles in Northern Ireland, and they have continued to work and pioneer their way through that. And I thought that would be a good model for us to start with in terms of reconciliation among the communities here. And at that time, I did not know Gavin Sirkin, who's a great friend of Vincent, and they've been working internationally in countries that are more challenged internationally than us here in the U.S. And I was like, man, I can't even believe that because, again, all my life, my struggles has been right here, at least in my mind. And Gavin is one of the top finance guys when it comes to financial literacy around the world, and that's I kind of kidnapped him to participate on the project because after him and Vincent met and and talked about the work we was doing in South Carolina, and shortly after that, Gavin had some work to do in New York. And that work he had to do in New York, the Wall Street Journal was carrying the issues that we're faced with in South Carolina. So he was like, I can't believe these things are really happening. I got an inside scoop and I'm in New York. So saying that to say, at the time, Vincent showed me Gavin's book and the work he's done in Frontier. So again, at the time, I ordered my copy and didn't get it. So when I ended up meeting Gavin in New York, I had no idea how much reconciliation and justice awareness go hand in hand to economic inclusion and development. And when I got back on the plane to come back home, I saw how much that book played a part in the work that I know we could add to our platform, get done in the States among challenged, disadvantaged communities. And that's what brought this panel here. So we want to thank Newberry College. Definitely thank the sacrifice that these gentlemen have made to be here. So as small as it may look in number, it's a great, great development taking place right here in our communities. And I'll say the last thing before I let these gentlemen speak. We was at a conference just a few days ago, and one of the financial leaders was talking about how he's been writing about the housing bubble for so many years before it actually happened. And he said, sometimes things that can stop will stop. And sometimes you hang on to it a lot longer, not knowing that it has stopped. And I think that this is the beginning of something and the end of something that in the minds of so many people have been going on so long that you don't even think it's a solution. And when you turn the news on, you see all the issues and things that we think that have desensitized people from racial discrimination and police brutality and all those things. But that's the media job, is to get the story out there. You know, institutions save institutions. The individual has to save individuals. And that's what this is about. So we want to thank Newberry College. Definitely want to welcome both of these gentlemen to take the sacrifice and put their careers on the line to come, you know, join me. And again, we want to thank you. And I'd definitely like Vincent to tell you a little bit about his background. That amazes me every time, because I never heard of Dr. King inspiring a race other than myself.
I thought you all wanted to hear about the money first.
No, that's great.
You all wanted to
So connected.
hear how to make it. Of course, it's all connected. Thank you all very much for coming here today. My name is Vincent Coyle. I'm from a city in Ireland called Derry. It's Derry City. In Ireland, I'm from the Catholic community, and the part of Ireland I live in is 6 counties of Ireland, which is ruled by Great Britain. And when I was growing up, because of my religion, I was ghettoized in the Bogside, which is a small, maybe 5 mile square area of Derry City. And we lived in very bad conditions back then. And it was very, very difficult growing up. The status quo was not changing. But my father's generation looked to the United States, as we all looked to the United States for leadership. The whole of Europe looked to the United States for leadership. And in those days of the 60s, we had Prague, we had the riots in France, and we looked to a man called Dr. Martin Luther King, who talked about nonviolence and civil disobedience, to go out there and take your rights. So under his leadership, that's what we done. And in the middle 60s, we went on the streets, and it was non-violent demonstrations. My father took me. I often think back, I'd never take my son to a thing like that, because the police violence, the police brutality was unleashed upon us. It was the absolute full might of the state against me and my family and the people who dared to take on the state and ask for what was right. Now, we weren't looking for anything. We wanted the right to vote. We wanted to be able to have a home. We wanted to be able to get a job. We just wanted the simple human decencies that any human being would want. But it was the watching of the United States and the leadership of Martin Luther King that men could have their dignity and their pride and march upon their streets. That's what gave us the leadership. And in the first 18 months of the civil rights in my city and throughout Northern Ireland, we obtained one man, one vote. Because in Ireland, we had a thing called gerrymandering, which meant that if you were Protestant, you had 10 votes. If you were Catholic, you had 1. Work it out. And we lived in a democracy. So we were able to change that. We also got a thing called parity of esteem, which meant was my worth was as good as my next door neighbour's worth. And you know, we achieved an awful lot of things. Then maybe we were getting too many things, and the state brought in a thing called internment, which was we could put you in prison without any trial whatsoever. I believe totally in justice, going way back to Magna Carta, which gives every man the right to a speedy and fair trial. And this right was being taken from us to shut us down politically. I remember the leader of South Africa at the time says, if we had the same rules as they have in Northern Ireland, we would have no trouble here. That's how draconian the rules were in Northern Ireland. So in 1972, we took part in a march in our city in Derry to try and stop internment. The Saturday before, we had marched to the internment camp in a non-violent way, and we marched along the beach. And on that beach, we were met with the British Army Paratroop Regiment, which really went to town on civilian non-violent demonstrators. But we wanted those men and women who were interned without trial to know that there was people out there who had justice in their mind and non-violence in their heart. So the following Sunday we thought, we'll have to march again and say that you can't beat the people have the right, and this is our voice. The march left the Craigan. It was a non-violent civil rights march, but within an hour it became the bloodiest day that Ireland had seen in many, many years. 14 of my fellow marchers were shot to death by the Paratroop Regiment, another 14 were wounded, and a further 350 were very seriously injured with CS gas and plastic bullet guns. But I know that in the United States there was Bloody Sundays. I know that in other countries around the world, in South Africa, there was Bloody Sundays. We have all suffered these Bloody Sundays. But there comes a time in your life when you have to move forward. In Ireland, through the peace process, and we were blessed that we had the help and the aid of the United States to come to our aid, to help us in the Good Friday Agreement, by coming and being a fair broker, by bringing both sides together and guaranteeing the peace for all, and that parity of esteem would be seen by all in the Good Friday Agreement through the Stormont House Agreement. And that was a huge step forward. But then we had to overcome the suffering and the pain caused by either side to each other. So that takes a reconciliation program. And that's where we are at the moment in reconciliation, is to overcome the hurt and the pain and the loss. I work very closely now with victims who are seeking justice. They want the men who killed their family members in front of a judge and a jury in a court. And that's what we hope to get for them. Because without justice, then it's very difficult to ever receive a true reconciliation. But we're moving forward on that. One of the other things that we're working on, of course, is financial inclusion. Because true freedom to a lot of people is financial inclusion. You've got to include all the communities in a financial way. You've got to make the entire community feel that they are stakeholders in the future of the country. You've got to give people that freedom that they can choose. And that's what we need to work on as well. There's got to be a dividend for moving forward. And hopefully, as a friend of the United States, if I can come and listen and talk and just share my experience of what happened to us in Ireland. And I have came, and this is my third trip to the States on this particular matter, and I've gone into a lot of communities and I've listened to a lot of people. I've been to white churches and I've been to black churches. Yesterday I had the honor of being invited to a church where a terrible atrocity took place within this year, only a few months back, where 9 human beings were slain by a young boy who wanted to begin a race war. And the humbleness and the humility of those people who invited us there and brought us in and made us feel welcome. I felt for their sake, we've got to start moving towards a reconciliation and moving forward, showing young people there is a better way, and everybody has a part to play in this. And thank you. I'm sure there'll be some questions people will have for me after that, but I want to give Gavin a chance to talk about financial matters.
Thanks, Vincent. So, you know, there's a way that English people have of telling jokes or telling stories, which usually starts as an Englishman, there's this Irishman, and then there's this South Carolinaman. And I don't know quite how this story finishes, what the punchline is to it, but it certainly starts with 3 very diverse backgrounds that have come together in a way that was completely surprising to me. I started writing this book, Frontier, as really a way to find out for myself of all the countries in the world that you see coming up, rising from very poor beginnings. You know, you think of the past 20 years, how China has risen up, how India has risen up, to a lesser extent Russia, but still, you know, coming up from a much poorer situation, Brazil. And I wanted to get to the people who had predicted this, the people who had 15 years ago been putting their money in Brazil, in India, in China, and seeing what it was that they saw in those countries that maybe they could look at the next countries that were going to rise up. So I began by going to those investors, going to those big money managers from Wall Street, names like Morgan Stanley, Franklin Templeton, the sorts of companies that run our pension funds, our mutual funds. And I asked them, you know, which countries that aren't yet in this emerging markets world will be the next ones. 4 of those countries that they picked were in Africa, starting with Egypt, Ghana, Kenya, Nigeria. 3 of them in Southeast Asia, places like Sri Lanka, Vietnam, Burma. A couple in Europe, Latin America, like Romania, Argentina. So I started on this book, and I started traveling with these investors. Each investor that picked a country, I went to that country with these top performing guys. And the 4th country was Argentina. And very sadly, my wife's, who's sitting videoing here, her father had a heart attack when we were in Argentina. So I came back unexpectedly on a flight, just wanting to write about my experiences in Argentina for that chapter. And this guy just wouldn't shut up. You know? I sat down next to him, you know, an Irishman, and he talked and talked. 12 hours later, arriving in London, you know, I realized what fantastic story this man has to tell. You know, to give you some, you know, Vincent's a very humble man, but just to give you some insight into what he's achieved during his life. His father was a big civil rights protest leader from Derry, as he mentioned. Vincent, going on in Ireland, he, unlike anyone else, was able to move between these 2 communities, to be something of a go-between during the peace process involving President Clinton, involving Tony Blair. And he's come out of that wanting to do more. You know, he's been a big process of what's happened in Northern Ireland, and now, you know, he's pushing that to see what he can do in other places where, you know, things still need to be coming together between communities. So then he told me about Terence, who was the next link in this. And, you know, Terence is pushing on a similar cause. And the link between these 2 fellows is they've both been in prison. And you know, Terence, like Vincent, came out of prison with this mission that he was going to change things for the people around him. And this is where we are today. I'm extremely humbled to be sitting on a platform with these 2 people. Terence taught me when I had finished this book, you know, my mission, as I said at the beginning of this book, was to find out which countries were going to rise up, you know, to look at those countries, to give people something to invest in, to find an interest in. And the readers that I had in mind would be investors, would be people with money to invest in these places, students like yourselves, you know, people that are interested intellectually about the rest of the world, economists, students of economy. But Terence said, but it's also relevant to people in South Carolina that are looking at this book, and they don't have an experience of financial literacy. They don't have an experience of being able to get financial products because maybe they don't have the right address. Maybe they don't understand the way that loans work. Maybe they don't have any way to get a credit reference. So one of the first chapters in this book is talking about Kenya. And there's an incredible program that is going on in Kenya called M-Pesa, which means basically mobile money, which is all about using your mobile phone to transfer money around. So if you're a young guy working in Nairobi and your mother is out in the rural district, as tends to be the case, and you want to send your money home to help your family, in the past you would have to trust the bus driver, you know, to go off, take your pile of cash off to the rural district. M-Pesa through Safaricom, which is backed by Vodafone, big company, changed all of that. You know, so you could transfer your money without having a bank account, without having any credit reference or history across thousands of miles to your mother in a poor district. And it really revolutionized the whole of Kenyan society, in that people that were previously completely financially excluded suddenly became included. And that led people to have a record that they could then get a loan from this company, they could borrow, they could invest very small amounts of money in a savings account. So just 50 cents you could put away in a savings account and earn a rate of interest on it. Previously, with the banking system, that was unheard of. You couldn't have a savings account for such small amounts of money. So it's lessons like this that Terence has picked out from this book, which is, as I said, a completely different audience from the one that I intended, but one that I'm extremely pleased and really privileged and honored that it has reached out to a completely different type of readership. So with that, I'll bring it back to Terence to maybe explore some other areas that we can look at.
Well, I'm always excited to hijack you when it comes to an opportunity, and that's where you guys come in, the future leaders of our society, and your family members and friends that can empower society to move us into the next century. And what I'll tell you about this book that was interesting to me, let me get this statement out because I don't want to run out of time before I do. Most people commit a crime for financial inclusion. You go to prison, everybody there for a money crime. You get your exception where people might have been some violent or some other reason, but 90% of the people you're going to meet, it's for money problems. It's just when you get there, whatever crime you committed to get there, you're going to realize you got that problem and 100 more problems before you're going to even get back to the money that you committed the crime for in the first place. But you don't get there. you don't know that until you get there. Then when you get there, the first thing you do is try to spend your time trying to figure out how you're going to get some money while you're there. Much less how you can empower yourself to make money when you get out. And the one thing you got access to in there is to read, because you don't have access to anything else. And what you want to read, if you're in prison for money, you need money. And you want to make money when you get out. Wall Street Journal, Financial Times, and things of that nature. Nobody tells you what it takes to be qualified to be involved in the financial markets. So pretty much the things that Gavin wrote about in this book, I actually had forgot about since I had got out of prison, because business and things have changed so much than when I went to prison, and society was much different after 12 years. But this book gives you a look at the infrastructure of the making up of the economy, the financial market, what it takes for a company to be successful, and what are some of the things that the executives look at when they're making investments in and out of the businesses that they're in. So I thought that would be great to introduce, the school here to, and anybody in the community that actually are affected by, commerce, trade, supply, demand, things of that nature. So I thought that it was best to get this book into our community. Being that we're in South Carolina, and it has been a very challenging state for, disenfranchised communities, that if we could get Gavin and the work that he's done, if we could get this book on our platform, that would be the turn of a century for a lot of young people who, again, don't have access to the financial market, but more than don't have access, we don't understand it. We don't even know, the course of our lifestyle, how, we are beneficial to investors around the world, but we don't, use our income to, reproduce things in our community. So that book for financial inclusion was something that I wanted to introduce the community here to, and it's even more important that he agreed to, be part of our platform and to share an opportunity like this, because of course, when you look at this panel, I couldn't pay for it. So I will hope that you young people could take this opportunity to get this book and read it and apply it to your lives and apply it to your conversation, because again, I pretty much read a lot of business books when I was away, but this was the one book that I knew that the average person could read and understand what's really being said in this book. And I think that if we could get this story out to our community, I think it would aid us in terms of our justice awareness program, where the first thing you do is that, let me say this too about crime. The reason why the justice system is so hard on crime is because when you commit a crime, you actually, the money that you benefit from a crime, let's use drug, which was my background, that money circumvents the very system that's built to produce opportunity. that means you go out and you make a transaction, that money end up in a foreign country or somewhere in a barn, some drug lord will end up protecting it. So that money never taxed, never put back in the system, produce schools, produce opportunities, organization, things within the community. So that's one of the reasons why, you know, you look at these sentences and you say that's outrageous, that was just drugs. Well, of course, you know, it's like they're trying to stop cancer because they know if they don't, you know, put a hammer down on you, then the further that goes into the community, then you don't get no reinvestment in the community. Next thing you know, you can't get schools, you can't get teachers, you can't get tourism. So those things works against, but you don't know that, and that ain't something that they teach. And I guess the most important reason for this panel is that legal awareness was not in the school system, at least when I was in school, when I did go, because school was a job for me and my community, you know. It was all about shortcuts, about, you know, how you can go and get something that you want or needed in a day. So that being said, going out and reading this book just brought all things back to memory for me. And I think that when you look at someone who can write a book with the resume he has, but this book had to be written going through everyday experiences that we go through. It ain't like they provided him no big office with the glass ceiling to write this book. He had to actually go through the ground, go through some of the challenging communities, if I'm not correct, to write this book, correct?
Correct, yeah. I mean, the challenge for me was, I basically don't like reading financial books. I don't like the heaviness of the jargon. I enjoy travelogue, but I get frustrated with travelogue because it's too, you don't really get into a country enough to really understand the politics and the society. So I wanted to blend the two elements. You know, I wanted to get something that was a bit deeper than most travelogue, but that you could actually learn a lot about a country without having to embrace all the financial jargon. So it's a happy meeting point that we had, because, you know, that's the book that I wanted to read, so that, you know, you end up writing the book that you want to read. And as it turned out, that was also a way that Terence found to read finance without, you know, without having to get too much into the jargon, which is such a barrier to people to access the financial industry. I mean, you're right, Terence, in that the book involves traveling to lots of, you know, to all of these countries. One of the most moving experiences that I had was of one of the poorest slums in Nigeria, where there's it's in the lagoon in the center of Lagos, and it's a very shallow water, and so homes are built on stilts on top of the lagoon. And children splash about in the water, and, you know, the sad thing is that a lot of those kids die from cholera, from diarrhea, things that are perfectly treatable, but because this is an illegal settlement, they don't have hospitals, there's no police there. So it's just a completely abandoned community. In the middle of this community, I met a guy called Samuel Pelumi, who was just as poor as everyone else, but he somehow managed to scrape together to get along to the University of Lagos, and from there he was studying zoology because he wanted to work out how to attack this pollution that was killing his community. And from each of these countries, you find such inspirational individuals who are changing the landscape around them. And from this one guy in the slum, there are other people who were billionaires. A guy in Argentina who brought it upon himself to drill a tunnel through the entire Andes mountain range because he wanted to be able to get Argentina to export to China. That's where he saw Argentina's great economic future. And he realized that by going right around the cone of Latin America up to Asia, Argentina was never going to be able to compete. And it was always, if anyone's ever heard of, what's going on in Argentina, it's kind of repeat crisis after economic crisis. And he saw a way of using the geography from this other side, from the Chilean side, to really bring Argentina up. So it's stories like that that you come across only from traveling, only from meeting people like this, and seeing how these people are pulling their economy and pulling the politics up to a level where the country can become great, become one of the big countries of the world.
And I think that I want to turn it over to Vincent Core, because I want him to share with us about some of the challenges that these third world countries are going to for economic inclusion, and some of the things that I had the privilege of learning when we went to the United Nations, and you'll see where that come into play, is that we look at those major institutions as though they're the solution to all the problems and why we have poverty and things of that nature, around the world. And there's a area of politics that I think that has some bearing on that, and just to hear his travel around the world and what it took to change some of the things that he had to participate in bringing reconciliation in order to set the tone for economic inclusion. And I want him to share that before I close with a point that we had a conversation today with some local businesses and what this panel means to them in terms of bringing us, connecting social good with economic empowerment, which becomes a global and international story, and hopefully a sensation for our community. So if you'll share that.
Well, I'll try and keep it as short as possible, because I know everybody's got other semesters and other things to be doing. In an awful lot of countries around the world, you've got tribal situations to get food, to get medicines, to get help into people. You could start off with 12 trucks. And by the time you get to the village that you'd set out to, you might have one truck, and during the night the engine and the wheels will go. So you've got to reconcile through all and each and every one of those places that you go to, because the food you're actually intending to take the people to could be an enemy of the people that you're going through. So you have a lot of those problems to overcome, and you've got to reconcile where this does everybody good to look after their communities throughout. And I think that that's a lesson for every one of us, that, it's about the common good of all of us, that we make a reconciliation in some way and every day. But, it starts off with a very, very small whisper. And we done that for the first time on the 28th of March here in this state. It was a wonderful day, and we're going to do it again next year. So we could talk an awful lot more, but as I say, we want to keep it tight. And maybe if more
I'll share the last 3 points and things that we want to bring to your attention. We have 3 things that we're focused on right now to move our project forward. One, we're working with the communication department here to produce a documentary that will be more in detail of the work that we are doing and how the story came about, and some of our experiences of working together. International statesman, just say the black guy, and of course the financial guy here, and the community college connection. We're having tons of fun. I mean, catching people by surprise, but we're learning and we're enjoying each other as we go. And so that's going to be one project that we're working on. We hope to inspire you students to share with your community and to participate and to help us move it forward and to be a guide for us, because again, you got to put something into change and things, and you can be a respondent, you can be proactive, and it's our intent to be proactive. So we're hoping that documentary will share that with us in the communities. The other project we have is International Day of Reconciliation, which is an event that we have every March on the State House, where we all going to be this year combined with Northern Ireland to celebrate some of the events that take place around the world that works in reconciliation. So we'll be there sharing that. We have a website that's going to promote that work. So if you guys can share and participate with us in International Day of Reconciliation. And the last, which is a bigger project, which was dear to me, but it's becoming such a challenge, that's the film project, There's No Right Way to Do Wrong. And it's educated entertainment. The film There's No Right Way to Do Wrong is aimed to help educate people who pretty much wouldn't read a book, who wouldn't come to the schools, who's not gonna pretty much have no social structure at home. And we want to use all the things that challenge you out there in the streets to make some of the irrational decisions that we see a lot of young people make, the shooting in 5 Points, the state fair, some of the execution of the police officers, some of the gang activities, and some people who I met along my way. Once all us got to prison, we were like, we didn't know. So, but it's too late. You got victims at that time, and, some things you can't reverse. And by the time you're on that side of the fence, it's going to be almost impossible to cross back across because, once you're in, the programs and things of that nature that you would think that would be available to you or not. That's why recidivism is so high. So we're hoping to film there's no right way to do wrong or aid us in prevention. And definitely in deterrence once we can, and the angle that we're going to use with that project is the fear. That's the one thing I think that we have not talked about that we want to share. Within every person, there's a degree of fear that leads up to the actions that they'll take. And I think that we live in a society that, they talk that hate is stronger than love and revenge is stronger than forgiveness. At least that's the entertainment industry. And we want to take a time out to bring educated entertainment that will talk about some of the things that lead people to make the decision that they make, and we feel like that would be a great educational piece. So we'll turn it back over to Scott Joyner and Dr. Wonder, unless you ask questions. Okay, questions?
Can I just say, one thing that we promised on Twitter was the 3 best questions today get 3 books.
So we got 3 questions and we get 3 books. Anyone have any questions? Gentlemen in
the back. All three of you are involved in the arts in some way as an author, an actor, playwright. How have those skills helped you as in your steps as you say civil rights activist and in finance and in all that? How has that motivated and guided you, if at all?
Well, in my case, being an actor, it opened doors to people. I wasn't this or I wasn't that. I was always a civil rights activist. But when you're an actor as well, it sort of mellows it a bit, and people don't want to attack you as quick, because I've seen myself in negotiation situations with people, quite heavy people, quite violent people. But you could soften it by talking about something in the theatre or whatever, but then get down to the point and say, I've been speaking to some other people and they're willing to do something if you do something. And then the next question is, you mean to tell me you were in the room with him and he's still alive? I says, well, that's kind of what he says to me about you. So you can break it up,
Yeah.
So the fact of my acting background allowed me to do that. Also the fact that that gave me an awful lot was I had gone through 2 years of solitary confinement to change the prison system, and a 69-day hunger strike, of which I had a royal pardon from Queen Elizabeth because I was an innocent man, and she signed that off and I was released. But I walked out of there a free man and an innocent man, and I changed the prison system, and I gave prisoners who had no rights to defend themselves, that they could stand up and be men, and that was Protestant and Catholics. So that sort of gave me a free sort of a passport, if you like, to go into areas and to talk to people that normally someone from my background would never have been able to do. So that kind of is, I hope that answers them.
Yeah, I think as well, probably you got the link with your father, who was in a way, like an actor. You to go in and be a civil protest leader, you have to get in front of a huge crowd and give them a vision, to tell them leadership, to direct them. And this was in a situation where there was a lot of violent conflict, and Vincent's father, Vinnie Coyle, was the guy that was saying, keep the peace, don't throw back stones at the police, turn your backs. To do that is somebody who has to stand up in front of a big audience, just like an actor, and be very bold in what they're saying. For me as an author, I don't have any of that. I'm somebody who can think about a situation and think it over in my head and hopefully get it down on paper